Combination of a tennis coach at a Division I college and a psychiatrist. That combination of being a medical doctor and a tennis coach, and especially a sport that is as mentally tough as tennis, puts him in a very unique situation to offer perspective to what he does for a living, which is psychiatry, combined with an overwhelming influence of neuroscience. So he has a great practice in which he is working with athletes, and he has the neuroscience behind it. And that's one of the themes of today that we want to constantly hit on, is the science. And the reason why we're doing these things is because we know from scientific evidence that this is the right thing to do. Dr. Dewan did his medical college at the Medical College of Ohio. He did a psychiatry residency at University of Southern California. He was a college tennis player and then was a college tennis coach prior to going to med school. But it's just a great combination of athletic prowess, academic achievement, and that's why we are so fortunate that he's here locally. He lives here, he practices here in the Baycare system, and was a speaker last year, and was, from everyone's evaluation, that's the reason why he's back again. We don't have speakers back-to-back year after year, but he certainly has found a place here, and we're glad he agreed to come back and speak to us. Dr. Dewan.
Thank you for that introduction. So, on your evaluation, say strongly agree. Start with that. Last year, I spent a great deal of time on neuroscience, and some of the feedback we got was, can you not only spend time on neuroscience, can you spend time on psychology? So I'm combining the two this year, so you get a sense of it. And the talk today is about resilience, fat, or tipping point. Most of the people have heard the word resilience, I imagine. Yeah. Good. My goal today is to give you the sense of science of this field, where it's heading, and at the end of my presentation, you're going to make this decision about, are we at a tipping point, or is this just a fact? So let's begin. Before I do that, I've got to get my phone out for a second. I've got to tell you this email I have here. I should read out this email to you. And it's an email about youth. So, our youth now love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority. They show disrespect for their elders and love chatter in the place of exercise. They no longer rise when elders enter the room. They contradict their parents, chatter before company, gobble up their food, and tyrannize their teachers. Sound familiar? That was said 2,400 years ago by a guy named Socrates. Now, he didn't email it to me. I emailed this to myself. But I thought I'd read it for you. All right, so there are certain truisms with adolescence. And here's some of those truisms. We all know that adolescence is a search for personal identity. It's a search for social identity. But it's also a time of great behavioral impulsivity and emotional volatility. You all have experienced that. You may not remember that personally, but you experience it if you're a parent. There's also opportunities for what's called irrational thinking in adolescence. And before I talk about the unique biological vulnerability to stress, here we have a population of individuals who have chaotic emotions, chaotic thinking styles, don't know who they are, don't know where they belong, yet they believe they're smarter than everybody here. Right? So, extremes. Now, in April of this year, in the Journal of Translational Psychiatry, this was the first published study in the world that said, when we look at stress and its impact on the gene of, let's say, what's called a stress receptor gene. Usually with severe traumatic stress, whether you're a 1-year-old, 10-year-old, 15-year-old, 30-year-old, 60-year-old, it doesn't matter, that gene gets altered. It's called methylation. So there's a carbon and 3 hydrogens that are involved in what's called the biological transcription and translation of the gene for the stress receptor. Well, in adolescents, even moderate to severe stress can cause alterations. And this was the first published study in April of this year that found that. Now, it's an initial study. So we don't really know over the next 5 years if we're going to have more data on what's called the epigenetics of stress. You know, David talks about the genes, and in his book it's about the genes and how it impacts sports performance. But the field is moving towards something called epigenetics, which means environment-gene interactions. So in adolescence, we're going to learn much more in the next 10 years on this issue of epigenetics and stress and resilience. Now, resilience is a very young psychological concept. Its first notation in the scientific literature was in the late 70s. The first measure of resilience that has broad use throughout the world now is something called a CV risk. And this was actually developed in what's called clinical trials, where people were testing medicine, and certain patients got better, others didn't, and nobody could explain this. So they said there must be some positive psychological trait or psychological capacity that some people are better than others despite receiving the same treatment. So this measure now is being used around the world in almost every study in traumatic stress and every study in stress in general. And it's this measure of resilience that looks at, do I know what to do? Do I set high standards? Do I trust myself? Can I tolerate being negative? Do I think stress is good? And do I accept change? Do I have good relationships? And do I have a strong faith? That all is about resilience. Okay? Now, resilience, and there are people around the world that are using sports and exercise to increase resilience. There are a lot of studies in the literature after, say, earthquakes or major traumatic events around the world, where if you make the adolescents get involved in exercise and sport, their resilience is improved. So we know sport impacts resilience. We also know that when you look at a technical definition of resilience, it's basically, can you thrive in the face of adversity? Okay? Do you have that capacity? Sports resilience is, can you adapt to adversity? Can you adapt to loss? Can you adapt to injuries? Can you adapt to a 3-month stoppage in play because you've injured something? Okay, now, if you're Pharrell Williams, resilience means nothing can get you down. So if there's anything you can remember out of the 30 minutes I'm sharing with you, it's that song. And I think that guy was dancing, started dancing, so I'm glad I stopped it. Can't nothing get you down. I know the song is Can't Nothing Bring You Down, but resilience is Can't Nothing Get You Down. Okay, so that's what resilience is. Now, in sports, the first really good article on sports resilience was published in 2012 by 2 British researchers where they looked at Olympic gold medalists. Well, these athletes, they overcome adversity. What's so special about them? What's so different about them? So when you look at that little inner circle, you think of, well, it's because they look at challenges differently. They think through challenges differently. Well, what impacts that? Is it confidence? Is it being positive? Is it being motivated? They're just focused, or do they have lots of support? Is it their temperament, or is their character? Now, you'll see those words in the literature over the next 10 years. Temperament is what you have genetically been born with. Character is what you develop. Now, resilience is actually a combination of the two. There are some people who are born with genes that make them more positive, or contrary, make them more negative. There are some genes that are about stubbornness, But then there's other genes that have nothing to do with adaptive distress. Okay? So resilience is both character and temperament. So how do we make sense of resilience? Because it's a very complex topic. So what I'm going to do over the next 5 to 10 minutes is take you through what I would call the accepted psychological theories of learning and human behavior and how it applies to sport. Okay? And the oldest theories, and you have to realize at the turn of the century, 20th century, a lot of people in this field were thinking that human behavior was driven by unconscious mechanisms. Everybody knows about Freud, but there were also behavioral scientists that said, you know what, human behavior is unconscious. It responds to mathematical connection between what's called an antecedent, which means what happens before a behavior, the behavior, and then what happens after. If you reward a certain behavior, it tends to happen again. If you put people in a situation that reminds them of a behavior, they do it again. Where this applies in sports is that connection between the antecedent and the behavior is used by most people that deal with performance anxiety. Okay? So this is why teams or people will go to a stadium or go to a situation and allow that anxiety to reduce for 15 minutes. They habituate to the situation. That's a very old technique, is habituating to an anxious situation. When you're teaching a skill, there's reports in the literature. Is it better to say good job after 3 times of doing it right? Is it better to let somebody go and implicitly learn and say after 15 times of doing it right, say good job? We don't have the answer. The only people that really have the answer of how to mathematically do this are the people that program games. I'm serious. You tell me an adolescent that is not playing a good game, and if you don't say dinner's ready, otherwise automatically being rewarded to play better in a game. Those are MIT scientists that have figured out the mathematical algorithm. They haven't shared it with us in the sports area. When they do, we'll be smarter at teaching sports. But right now, we don't know how to, what's called, create the contingencies for better learning in sports. But we can use these theories to help people with resilience, and I'm going to show you in a little bit how. Like I said, in the early 1900s, behavior was unconscious. People were thinking this is unconscious. We can just manipulate people. Well, in the 50s, they said, well, behavior is not unconscious. People actually think. And people on the West Coast at Stanford came up with this social learning theory. It says you don't have to experience a consequence or an antecedent. You can just observe it. And not only can you observe it, you actually think. And so when you start with an antecedent, before the behavior happens, you think to yourself, can I really do this? If you're in softball, the count is 3-2. If you're in tennis, it's third set tiebreaker. Whatever sport, if it's basketball, time's out, you have 2 foul shots remaining, it doesn't matter. If it's football, 2-minute drill, doesn't matter. Can you do it? Do you believe in yourself? And there's a lot of people in sports psychology that try to help athletes, hey, you can believe in yourself. That's called self-efficacy. Locus of control is something else in psychology, and that's a measure of, do you control your destiny, or does the environment control your destiny? The self-efficacy issue is a much better studied construct than the locus of control. Motivational speakers focus on, you are in charge of your destiny. Psychologists will focus on, you should believe in yourself. Good coaches use both, okay? And in the work that I've interviewed and I've worked with many, whether it doesn't matter if whatever vocation you're in, doesn't matter if you're in healthcare, business, finance, sports, the winners have both self-efficacy and internal locus of control. They know they can determine their outcome, and they work very hard to do it. Now, following this sort of social learning theory where we were starting to accept that human beings can think, and they can think about their behaviors, especially sports behaviors, cognitive theory came about. And cognitive theory is about not only do people think, but thoughts are the key. Thoughts are the key, and the constellation of thoughts you have about yourself, your social identity, that's called a life schema. Now, in adolescence, that life schema is changing constantly. Remember I said it's a constant, volatile, chaotic sort of situation. So in that time, you have thoughts changing. You have how you think changing. So how is you, I read in the back, there are a lot of coaches here, right? Can just the coaches nod, whoever's a coach? Okay, good. There's a physical therapist, there's trainers, there's parents. Now, given what I've shared with you about resilience being a very complex construct, I've given you 3 basic theories, the behavioral theories, the social learning theory. Now, how can you use this now to increase the capacity of dealing with adversity in one's sports life? That's what I'm going to talk about now. Am I making good time? Yeah, I think so. When one looks at cognitive styles, and each player you work with will have a different cognitive style. They'll have a different, what's called a positive style and a negative style. And everybody has both. They have their way of motivating themselves, and then they have a way of cutting themselves down. Here are the 4 ways that people usually cut themselves down. Forecasting. If I don't get to play every day for the next 10,000 hours, I'm never going to make it. I'm never going to make it work. I lost today. That means that scout's not going to look at me. I just lost my scholarship and I lost my pro career. That's forecasting. Adolescents are very good at that. Personalization. I didn't win. I am no good. They blame themselves. Or catastrophic spiraling. Some of you were here last year. Remember when I made the DirecTV and Bright House sort of comparison? That catastrophic spiraling is, you know, I'm not going to get to play in the game Friday. That scout is going to be there. I know I'm only a freshman, but this would have been a good time to kind of showcase my talent. And they'll never come back, and I'll never have a future, and I might as well quit today. Okay? That's catastrophic spiraling. And then there's the never thinking, I'll never be good, I'll never be good. Well, every single person in this room can be what's called a cognitive coach. I've spent my whole career working with athletes, and I decided there's 3 million athletes. I can't reach all of them. The only people who can reach all these athletes is this audience, is the coaches, the parents, the supervisors. So how can you be a cognitive coach? There's easy 4 steps. Anytime you hear an adolescent do any of that catastrophic stuff or negative thinking or blaming, you have to stop and say, you know what, I know this is going to happen. Being negative is natural. Let's start recognizing when you're negative. Let's do a reality check. And let's rethink how you look at this. Let's convert that catastrophic thinking, that never thinking, to sometimes. So let's get somewhere in between. So this 4R technique of, look, recognize, reality check, reframe, then repeat it again. That's your job as a coach, is to recognize these things and to help the adolescent be a better thinker. Because neuroscience tells us that the greatest amount of what's called frontal lobe pruning occurs during adolescence. That means all those pathways about higher thinking, metacognition, occurs during this time. This is your chance, believe it or not, to change their thinking. Even though they don't think you know anything, they will listen. Now, how can you shape resilience? Using behavioral theory. You know, rewarding. Basically, you reward resilience. If you see, and you reward it by giving what's called a social reward. If you see an athlete, and it doesn't matter if they lost, but if they really showed that gumption, if they showed that hardiness, when you get done and you're a coach, you say, you know what? I know you lost. I know you're not happy. I'm not happy either, but you showed courage. And to me, that's great. To me, that's what sports is about. It's about building character. It's about building courage. So don't worry about it. We can teach you all the techniques. We can teach you everything. But this is what it's all about. So social rewards, and say it, and teach your teammates. Teach the teams to support each other. Research that's been done on sports teams is the more players on a team that support each other with this way to go, sort of for effort, or way to go, hey, you came back pretty well, that team gets better. You look at Spurs, what they did. Okay? Belief statements. Remember self-efficacy. I know you can do it. I remember many years ago, Tommy Lasorda walks onto the mound with Fernando Valenzuela, and he's not doing well. Bases are loaded. And he goes up to Fernando and says, you know what? You are the best low ball pitcher in all of MLB. I know you can throw that ball down, and I know that guy will hit a ground ball, and we'll get a double play, and we'll be out of this inning. Okay? And Fernando goes, okay, yeah, I can do it. He doesn't. Okay? He did it. All he needed was a coach. I remember when I was doing coaching in tennis, and the head coach went to one of our players, and this guy ended up being a All-American NCAA, went on the circuit. He just said, you know what? You've got the best volley out of anybody here. Just get to the net. Doesn't matter what you do. Just get to the net. You win. Sure enough, he won against a player much better than him. So if you see a talent in an athlete, tell them you can do it. Now, the other thing about resilience is something that people have not written about. It's called sports intelligence. Now, a lot of times athletes get, quote, bummed out, get rejected because they really don't understand the sport. And adolescents really don't understand the sport. I mean, I know people that have won the NCAAs that don't understand the sport. Okay? It takes a long time to understand the true aspects of the sport. So, the more time every coach spends on teaching the sport, so instead of making them play 10,000 hours, instead of hurting their cartilage, hurting their bones, hurting their muscles, more time can be spent teaching them the subtleties of the sport. Because teaching athletes subtleties of sports makes them think about solutions, increases their resilience, because they say, okay, can I really control this situation? Or is it just I'm not focusing on it? Or is there something I can do differently? So the more options you teach an athlete, the greater likelihood their resilience will grow. Does that make sense so far? Everything's it's kind of hard to boil down, 4 years of psychology into like 20 minutes, but I'm going to one thing that I did not mention that I wanted to mention in one of the previous slides is this idea of negative thinking, especially forecasting. I told you that from a frontal lobe viewpoint, adolescence is a time of great pruning. And by age 21, a lot of the pruning is taken care of in terms of the nerve fibers. The cerebellum, which is the part of the brain that controls, fine hand movement, eye-hand coordination, things like that. That pruning, and this is very, somebody was pruning some radishes underneath. That pruning takes place all the way through age 25. So when I deal with, say, first draft picks or second draft picks or people who've been drafted from college into the pros, and they're worried about their performance, they're worried, and that doesn't happen until age 25. So tell your kids and tell your adolescents, they've got a long way to go before their brain and their body automatically react to a sports situation. There's no need to hyper-specialize at age 9. It goes against science, completely against science. All right. So, how can we enhance focus and control? Remember, that was one of the issues that the British researchers found that was important in terms of resilience and ability to focus. Yoga, meditation. We have research now that shows in terms of resilience that this helps. Now, why would yoga help? Yoga helps because A, being able to control your breathing and being in control of every tiny muscle in your body gives you confidence. If you've ever done yoga and somebody says, lift your back, lift your stomach, now, how do I do that? But you get to control everything. You get to control your breathing. You get to imagine. So it really, it makes neurons fire that never knew existed. And your muscles that you never knew existed actually do exist. And the fact that you can breathe and be in this weird pose and not like fall over really helps. Now, I think I'm in good time, right? I've got about 3 minutes, 4 minutes left. I started today's presentation about an email from Socrates, kind of. Okay. So resilience, adolescence, we've known this for thousands of years. I mean, I'm ending with a Latin statement. By endurance we conquer. That's resilience. I was going to have that, you know that movie 300? I was going to have that quote, but I couldn't download it. The trailer is so good. But by endurance we conquer. That's resilience. This concept has been around for thousands of years. It is only since 2003 that we have started measuring. And in terms of sports resilience, I developed a measure 5 years ago, and it's only now that it's being researched. So the concept is old, the science is young, and because of the billions of dollars of research that's going into stress and traumatic stress and the use of these tools, I'll let you decide if resilience is a fad or a tipping point. I know what I think. And let me end with these last 3 statements, and I'll go with what the previous speakers have said. Sports and exercise, we have what's called the Goldilocks challenge. And what that is we have part of society that doesn't exercise enough. And so we have an epidemic of obesity and diabetes in adolescents. And then we have a part of society that exercises and does sports too much. And we get overuse injuries. So, and the kids aren't responsible. We are. So if we want to help Goldilocks meet that middle ground, that's our job. It's not their job. And so it's our job to make sure it's joyful. They will have goals. They will have dreams. There's nobody in this room that doesn't romanticize about being young again in high school. What a great time. That's why you go to your 40-year high school reunion. Nobody goes to their 40-year kindergarten reunion. Nobody goes to their 40-year college reunion. They go to their 40-year high school reunion. Because those memories, that exuberance, that joy, that wonderful time in life is a joyful time. So let them dream. And then finally, rest, rest, rest. The military historically said 6-month tour of duty. And this was developed by a group of both psychiatrists and psychologists about 70 years ago. 6-month tour of duty is what you should have. Because the competitive threats and its impact on that stress receptor gene in adolescence, you expose them to that much competitive threat nonstop, you're going to have permanent neurobiological changes. Permanent neurobiological changes. You can see the overuse injuries. You can have x-rays, and they'll show you. You will never see the overuse injury in those genes. You will never see it. Only those of us that look at this literature, that do this scientific work, see the results. And it's our job, my job as a psychiatrist and other people in this field to share this information with you. So you have a tremendous responsibility. So rest, rest, and rest creates better resilience. That concludes my comments for this morning. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you for your attention. Nobody wants to talk about their mother?
Great talk. Thank you very much.
the nature of sports. And, you know, I love the quote by Yogi Berra where he says, you know, baseball is 90% mental and the other 10% in your head. And so often, you know, you have a hitting coach, you have a pitching coach, you have all sorts of different coaches on the physical aspect, but yet we all agree